and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. I'm your host, Rohan, and with me today I have Phil. Hey, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. And we also have Aaron joining us.
Thank you, guys. Great to be with you.
First of all, we have a new release, which is 0.76, and we have some new features. The first one is there's a new upgrade for the database that happens with this release. So when you upgrade to 0.76, it may take a few minutes for Home Assistant to start up. The reason behind that is there's some database changes happening. One is for contexts, and the other is for users. So now, moving forward, as the new user authentication system becomes more integrated, we'll be able to see things like who actually turned off a light or did an automation turn a light off and on, or for those sort of reasons. Nothing really that you can use in the front end just yet, but just a heads up that when you do upgrade, just give Home Assistant a bit of time to start up. Some beta users were reporting upgrade times of around 15 minutes for about 30 days worth of data. I think by default, the recorder component stores 10 days of data. So yeah, obviously your mileage will vary, and it depends on if you're using MySQL or SQLite and all that sort of stuff as well. So watch out for that one.
Yeah, so if you do have that problem, just wait it out, and hopefully that you should be okay. So I'm actually doing my update as we're recording the show. So we'll see.
Oh, that's a good test. We've got to time it to exactly how long it took you, huh?
I mean, yeah, but that requires effort. So
yeah,
that what'll happen is that'll just distract me, and I'll end up either forgetting to do the upgrade or forgetting to do the show. So. So anyways, on that note, let's talk about some new features. So first up, we have a new platform called Writ Assist or Fleet Go. So basically, if you subscribe to one of those two services, and as those are fleet management services. So if you do subscribe to those services, you can actually bring in certain details about the vehicle, and they kind of show up on the map too. So that's kind of neat.
That's really interesting. So I guess it's sort of the pro version of those little car dongles that you can get added in.
Yeah.
Like,
so
what are they called? The tracker, or I can't remember what they're called, but they plug into that port in your car.
Yeah,
this would be obviously the next version up.
I think this is more, again, corporate. So I was just looking on FleetGo's website. They have, again, it's all companies with fleets, right? Like DHL, for example, and a couple other customers. So
yeah, right.
So it's, to me, I actually have worked with a customer that does something similar. I think they'd be a competitor to these guys. And essentially what they do is anybody with a large fleet, kind of knowing information about that, where are they? For example, if you need to get a delivery on time, how likely are they? Or a little weirder, if you can't find a truck or something, where did it go? They perform that kind of services. And from what I understand, that's what they do.
Oh, nice. And another platform that's been added in is Open UV sensors. So now you can view current UV index, the max UV index for the day, the ozone level for where you are, and the safe sun exposure time for the various skin types you may have.
Oh, interesting. That's actually kind of handy.
Yeah, and now Home Assistant can tell you whether or not you should wear sun protection at the current moment. So that's really cool. So now before you leave for the day, you can have Home Assistant say, hey, put your hat on. Like, it's hot outside. Come on.
Yeah, that'd be cool if you have, if you notice, maybe you have an automation where you open the door and it kind of yells at you going, hey, dork, make sure you wear a hat, or something along those lines.
Exactly.
Right. So that's pretty useful. So I could see a couple of good uses for that as well. Or even sending a notification, maybe, at some point saying, hey, by the way, this is what you should really wear, sunscreen today or something like that. So also we have the OnPhase Envoy component. So that's a solar energy monitor that they've brought in to Home Assistant as well. So if you're using solar energy, this is something, and you have the OnPhase dashboard, I guess that you have access to. You can now bring that into Home Assistant, make more intelligent decisions with how you're utilizing your electricity, hopefully.
I'm not too familiar with this one, but assuming it gives you like, oh, you're producing a good amount of solar today, then maybe you could fire off automations based on that, If it's really expensive to do run the dishwasher at night, maybe you could only run the dishwasher when you're outputting a certain amount of solar energy to get it for free.
Exactly.
Some cool automation like ideas like that, maybe.
Yeah, there's energy monitoring actually has some really good use cases. A lot of people just think it's, hey, you know what, great, my house is using, I don't even know how much an average house uses, but my house is using, whatever kilowatt hours or what have you, and okay, you can do a lot more interesting things. I mean, Phil, you use an energy monitor to detect if your dishwasher or washing machine are on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's some really good use cases, and based on, hopefully that'll save you some money too if you go down this route. So
there's also a new media player component for the DLNA. So that's basically a standard for how some TVs or network players can communicate over a local area network. We've now added support for any devices that support that. It can be a bit tricky with some proprietary TVs. I think Sony was mentioned in the pull request. So if you've got a DLNA-enabled TV or a media player on your network, you can now experiment with that with the media player component of Home Assistant.
Yeah. So also we have the PJ Link media player platform. So again, it's another media player platform. So in this case, it's specifically around projectors. So PJ Link itself is a protocol that certain projectors use. I believe BenQ uses it, and there may be some other ones as well. So if your projector uses that, then you can tie that into Home Assistant now and have it do certain things.
Nice. And the last new component for this release is the RMV public transport sensor, which is for the Rhein-Main area in Germany. Hope I pronounced that right. My apologies if I didn't. So yeah, another public transport sensor, which is always useful to have in Home Assistant.
Yeah. On to some breaking changes. We have support for what looks like a IoT hub called Decons. So if you're using that right now, it has support for power plugs and such, but essentially now they'll be brought in as switches instead of lights. So entities, you'll see them as switch dot whatever entity ID instead of light dot entity ID.
Okay, that makes sense. A good change to make, I guess.
Yeah, because
annoying if you've already set up all your automations, but a global find and replace should fix that for you.
Yeah, it makes more sense. Just again, it's going back to that whole let's standardize everything, right? So. Yeah. For example, power plugs. Well, I mean, if I'm using a power plug for maybe a TV or something to save electricity, well, at that point, that shouldn't really be a light, right? So
yeah, exactly. Another breaking change comes to the Kinetic NDMS2 routers. It's now going to be using Telnet instead of the web interface. So you may need to update your config if you've got a new IP address or a new username and password, you need to update it too. So just if you're using a Kinetic NDMS2 router, make sure you watch out for that one.
Yeah. I wonder if those routers have SSH, because Telnet is kind of...
It's very, it seems a bit like an old technology to use.
Yeah. And that's obviously part of the device tracker platform, right? To see...
Correct, yes.
Hey, are you home?
Are you connected to the router or not? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, that's interesting. Also, if you're using the Open Weather Map component, the wind speeds are converted to kilometers an hour now.
As an Aussie that doesn't use miles per hour, I like that.
As a Canadian who is also in that same boat, I also agree.
Australian Telstra users, the Telstra SMS notification platform has been removed with this release. Telstra have upgraded their API from V1 to V2, but there's no support for the Telstra V2 API yet. That notification platform stopped in May, I believe, anyway. But this is just completely removing it from Home Assistant, so you can't accidentally try and integrate it, and it's not going to work.
Also, Velbus. If you use Velbus, which is another hub, so you no longer need to specify modules manually in the config file. But if you load the Velbus component, it'll automatically load the switches and the binary sensors. Also, on top of that, the fan and light platforms have kind of been removed from Home Assistant since really they're looking at modeling them for templates, right, from the Velbus switches.
Oh, nice. Okay. And Facebox no longer admits events for when a face has been taught into its system. They were unnecessarily, really. So, yeah, if you were relying on those Facebox events, they're not going to be in your logs anymore.
Interesting. I wonder what the use case for that is, for when it was, because it's specifically when a face is taught, right? So, hey,
Yes,
I have
yes.
learnt Phil.
Correct.
I wonder what the use case. Maybe it's just put a notification out or something. But outside of that, I don't know.
Well, I guess you're not going to really learn a new face too often. Some noteworthy updates in this release.
Yes.
Kodi Media Player platform now supports unique ID based on the discovery. That's a good one. That'll give it, once again, adding things more to the standards. That way, entity IDs can be based on the unique ID that the Kodi platform provides, and they won't start switching around over restarts of Home Assistant. So that's a good update.
That's neat. Also on vacuums, Home Assistant now supports states. So that's cool. What's your vacuum actually doing right now, rather than just like hey, turn it on?
Because you've got one of those robot vacuums hooked up to Home Assistant, don't you?
No. So I'm kind of kicking myself because last minute I kind of cheaped out, because the 900 series. This is before the Roombas all standardized on Wi-Fi.
Oh,
So this
no.
is when only the 900 series, which is like, in Canadian dollars at the time, I think it was $1,100 or $1,200 or something like that. More than I wanted to spend on a vacuum cleaner. Let me put it that way.
Yep.
I kind of put all my stuff together and I was like, okay, an 800 should suffice. And I think, and it was on sale one day too. So I snagged it. So, great, whatever. And then a friend of mine, he has the 900 series and he has it hooked up to his Google Home. And he just kind of goes, hey, turn on the Roomba. It just kind of does its thing. And then he goes, I forget what he says, but, go home or tell it to go dock or whatever. And it does that. And I was like, oh, I'm kicking myself. I really wish I had that, because I would probably use the Roomba a lot more. Because for whatever reason, the timer on the Roomba just doesn't seem reliable. Like when you say, okay, turn on Mondays and Wednesdays at 3 p.m. or something like that. Yeah, I've never quite gotten that to work, but admittedly, I tried it like once or twice and I was like, all right, it's not working. I'll just press the button. So
I experimented with a robot vacuum cleaner. Like you, I wasn't willing to pay the $1,000 for the Wi-Fi connected Roomba, especially when I wasn't sure how good a robot vacuum cleaner would be. So I got I think it was like either an RF controlled or infrared controlled Samsung robot vacuum cleaner.
Okay.
And it basically just pushed dirt around my apartment, my one bedroom apartment at the time. So yeah, it didn't last long. But if you're really liking your robot vacuum cleaner, I think the Xiaomi vacuum cleaners, which are supported in Home Assistant, they're like $300, $400 US, and they're actually got very good reviews.
Yeah, I've seen those. There's a few. I have a friend that has a D-Bot. He seems to like it. And same kind of. So there's definitely a lot more options now. I think before it was like Roomba or one of the knockoffs that kind of push around the dirt, like you said.
Right. Yeah.
So I definitely wanted it to actually clean the house. If I'm going to pay that much money, it better clean the house. But I do use it. It's funny because I just ran it before we started recording, and I guess it finished in the in my home office, which is where my mic and my setup is. And so it's currently sitting under my feet, and I'm trying really hard not to press on the start button as as we're recording this podcast. So it's so if you hear a beep and then a loud vacuuming sound, that's why.
Another noteworthy update in 0.76 is for the Waze platform. There's now a switch has been added, allowing you to toggle on or off the real-time or the normal average travel time for Waze. So Waze has a really good prediction method. It bases it on the current traffic, how long is it going to take you, not just, in it's X kilometers away, it's going to take you roughly this time. It'll actually base it on the time of day and the amount of traffic it expects it to be there. You can now tell the Waze platform, don't worry about what you're expecting the traffic to be, just give me the average time or the normal time, instead of it constantly polling for that, what's the current traffic, what's the expected traffic to be.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because if I feel like is there and I haven't looked this up, but on Waze, is there a big API limit or something like that? Like why wouldn't I want real time?
And I haven't seen how it's. I haven't looked at the Waze docs for this change specifically, but if you could have two Waze sensors, you could potentially have one that's based on the traffic, and then one that's based on the normal average time, and then you could do a comparison. So if traffic adds an extra 8-minute delay, you could use maybe a template sensor in Home Assistant to work out there's an 8-minute delay from normal average traffic time because of the traffic, and then you can maybe do an automation based on that. If it's more than 30 minutes delay, maybe I'll take public transport today.
Okay, that's kind of neat. Okay, that's
the only annoying thing about the Waze API for me is it's region specific, and they don't have an Australia Waze API by the looks of it.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't realize that. So each country or region or what have you has its
there's
own
restricted regions. Yeah, I believe it's the US. I'm assuming Canada would be as part of that North America US region.
Yeah, I would assume Israel, because I know Waze was started out of Israel, I believe.
So they've got regions for Europe, US, NA, which I would assume is North America.
Yeah, I would think so, yeah.
Which does in the docs say equivalent to the US, or IL, which may be Israel, as you just said.
Interesting.
So, yeah,
okay.
Unfortunately, they're the only regions that are available at the moment. So, hopefully they expand that. So, a couple of episodes ago, Aaron, when I turned the microphone on, Rohan, we were talking about the parents' situation, how he's automating his parents' house. You mentioned to me offline that you had done something similar. So I was wondering if you could share it with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So a while ago, my mom had reached out to me and said, they have a Nest thermostat. They got one after we did, and we kind of commiserated on how to use it the best. And she had been telling me that she wanted to. She was finding basically the presence detection of the Nest was not sufficient for what they wanted. So they might come home to a really cold house, and then the Nest would kick on and would say, it would start to heat the house, but it would take a while. And she was asking, hey, is there a way to basically boost, I guess, the radius around their house so that maybe a mile away or 2 miles away, that's when it starts to kick on the heat or the air conditioning. And so I think it was actually she found an app. After a lot of discussion, she found an app to do this. So just an iPhone app that sat in the background and communicated with the Nest using a geofencing API. And great, it worked great for a long time. And then I want to say about 6 months ago, maybe 6 months ago, it started really kind of having some issues. The app would not work regularly. There were all sorts of support tickets flooding in that weren't being answered. And what ended up happening was the owner of this app was not actually a developer. There were, I guess, issues that he couldn't correct himself, and he was finding it cost prohibitive to hire a developer to fix them. And so my mom came back to me and said, hey, we still really like this. Is there a way that you can help us figure this out? And I thought, oh man, I'm going to have to write an iOS app, and this is going to be a disaster.
Oh no.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I just started thinking about it, and it clicked for me that I thought, hey, with Home Assistant, I could do this. If I mix presence detection, with the proximity component, which is a Home Assistant component to detect how far away the closest person is to a zone, and with the Nest component, maybe we could homebrew something that would work. And I started thinking about it, and I actually shut myself down pretty quickly because I thought, you know what, my mom is pretty technical, my dad isn't, but there's no way they're going to, run a Raspberry Pi somewhere. And oh man, what if it breaks? They live an hour and a half away from me.
You're going to be tech support.
Yeah, I'm going to be tech support. And then I thought, holy cow, hold on a second. I know that we at Home Assistant really like and promote local control, but think about this, Aaron. If I used OwnTracks on their iOS devices, OwnTracks, the proximity component, and Nest, all three of those didn't require local control. It could be the type of thing where I would have a Raspberry Pi at my house that would host the Nest integration. It would host an MQTT broker. It would do all that stuff, and then it could influence their Nest over the cloud.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so, long story short, not to belabor the point, it took some time to get the automations correct. And I added in a few things in addition to the proximity, changing of the thermostat, being able to manually override it. If they're coming back from the mountains, let's say, and they're 30 miles away and they want to start heating the house now, how to do that so that Home Assistant wouldn't get in the way later on. Long story short, I now, in my little stack of Raspberry Pis, I have one dedicated to my parents that is acting as their proximity climate sensor. And it also sends them, it replicates the functionality of the app that they had previously, in that it sends them a notification anytime the thermostat gets set to away or home. And so I can happily confirm that, but for a few hiccups related to my randomly unplugging the Pi for whatever reason, everything is working well. They are none the wiser, and they don't have to manage it all. So I think it's great, number one, that I could help my folks out, but number two, that as much as we love and cherish and desire local control, that not having local control in this case didn't hinder me from a solution that I was able to support them remotely.
Yeah, and I think it's important when local control, again, there's a lot of pros and cons on this topic, right? And in this case, it's local control would be, for you personally, it sounds like more of a con than a pro, where if you have to play tech support.
Yeah, in this case, absolutely.
So you've basically created a Home Assistant as a service.
Yeah,
that's right.
For your parents.
You are the cloud.
Yeah, I think there's 3 A's in there. That's right. I am the cloud. That's right. So I know I keep joking with my mom that I'm gonna have to raise her rates here at some point. I'm gonna have to introduce a platinum support package.
And you've literally got the, when something stops working, like, who's kicked the network cord out in the cloud now? That's going to be you.
Yeah,
that's right.
You've unplugged something.
I mean, truly, I'm okay being IT in this case, because you're right, Phil. If something has gone wrong, it's likely me who's made it gone wrong.
Yeah, and so it's the Nest that's all cloud based. So in your situation, it's lucky that your parents have everything cloud based anyway, and you're able to just use the cloud to influence their home.
That's right. And now I guess it would have been interesting to, try the use case where maybe there was some element that was only local, and could I do it in such a way that it was unobtrusive to my parents' life? I'm sure we could have figured that out. But yeah, in this particular case, it all worked out that everything they needed had sort of a cloud-esque component anyway. So really, I guess the only change they had to make, they deleted that app, that stopped working off their phones, and I had them install Own Tracks so that it could do the presence proximity detection. But again, as long as they leave that running, which they always do, they don't have to be any the wiser as to how this works.
Yeah, and as long as your internet connection and your parents' internet connection stays active, you'll be fine.
That's right. And I think that is part of my quasi support agreement with my mom, is that if the internet blows up, I am not responsible.
That's your SLA in writing there.
That's right. No internet, no guarantee.
That's funny. Have you considered putting maybe a VPN in between your place and their place? I guess you don't really need it in this situation.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ryan. I have thought about that. My mom actually does something like that for my grandma, her mom, where they've got a remote access thing set up, and I thought about that, and I certainly would not be opposed to it. But in this particular case, I thought, man, if I could hold on to control of everything just in my own network and not have to worry about how their topology is set up. Obviously, my folks are like most people in that they have the router and modem that their ISP gave them, and they're not networking people by any means. So as much as I can retain the control and the isolation to my own network, that in this particular case seemed like it was going to be less heartburn for either of us over the long term.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. So have you done any other awesome stuff since we last chatted to you?
Let's see. Any other awesome stuff? So I was telling Rohan offline, I did a kind of a flurry of pull requests over the last, I would say, month and a half or so that are not very sexy. It's not anything anybody's going to notice per se. I went through all of my components and I made them all asynchronous. So real quick, there's a concept, not just in Python, I guess it's in multiple languages now, but this idea of concurrent programming where you get the benefit of like a multi-threaded environment without needing multiple threads. Whatever. It makes the code a lot more stable. It's a lot faster. So really any of my integrations, Rain Machine, Air Visual, Pollen, the Yi camera, Tile, they should all be now running a lot faster, smoother, and more consistent with the rest of the Home Assistant core. The other kind of thing that I have on my mind, I need to find a way to just jump in and do it. One of the big things that's going on in Home Assistant core right now is this idea of configuration entries. Are you guys familiar with this?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically where like entity IDs can be pre-selected. Am I thinking the right thing here?
That's right. So if you go into the configuration panel and then there's an integrations section, Paulus and the crew have done a good job in the last few releases to add a lot more to this. So the idea here is eventually we don't want people to have to crack open a YAML file to configure a component. We want it to be through a GUI. And there's a framework in place for this now. So I think my next sort of task is I want to take a spin through all of my components, leave the YAML configuration in there for anybody who wants to use it. But for any newcomer who doesn't want to do that, be able to say, hey, I want to add a rain machine, and then fill in the IP address, fill in some other parameters, and hit save. And then it just configures itself for you.
Oh, nice.
Paulus is, we haven't really hit it hard, but I think he's really pressing the idea that that's the future. The future is getting away from YAML files, except for power users. So I'm trying to really button up my integrations as much as possible. I also selfishly, I want my integrations to be viewed as like a good standard that other people can follow. So I'm trying to do whatever I can to add enough to them to make them that standard.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
That's right. And I guess the last thing I'll tell you guys about, so having done the air visual and the pollen integrations, I've gotten a lot of requests from friends who are outside the United States, outside of North America. Hey, I would love pollen information or allergy information. I would love air quality information that's, consistent and useful. So I'm doing a bunch of research on whether there's APIs out there for this type of thing, or whether I can cough, go reverse engineer an app that does it really well and use their APIs. I'm trying to do an international allergy component here at some point. That would be sweet.
Could you look into something like, surely there's like a weather.com or any other like weather service that would aggregate that already? Could you then just pull the information out of them? Like they would get it from all these different places and then you can just suck it out of there?
I think that's the exact right way to do it, Phil. Even if I have to reverse engineer that, if I can find an aggregator. So what I'd encourage, everybody, my username on Discord is BACHYA. If you've got a really good source for international allergy information, ideally not localized. Ideally, we don't have a component for the Netherlands and a component for Australia and whatever. If there's an aggregator out there that you know about, that I just don't have my eyes on, hit me up and let me know. I'd love to find something that anybody in the world can use rather than just in specific locales.
Yeah, that would be cool. Because otherwise you might have to go ahead and create a whole like platform or then you get many sensors to do the same thing and it gets a bit messy.
One of the other things I've been thinking about, a lot of people ask, hey, I'd love to make a component and it's hyper localized, and that is another thing we think about. Is it doesn't mean it's a bad component, but we want to do things that are broadly applicable. So if anybody's got something that they think, hey, this seems to be a good source of allergy data for a lot of countries, hit me up with it. I'd love to take a look at it.
Well, we will leave contact details for Aaron in the show notes and also on the Hass Podcast website, hasspodcast.io. If you haven't had enough of the Home Assistant podcast for 1 week, we have another special episode coming out in a week's time, so watch out for that one. Aaron, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your Home Assistant as a service. I really like that idea.
That's right. HAAAS. That's what we're doing going forward.
And you're going to offer a monthly fee for everyone? And we can just have a little...
That's right. I will have at least 10 different tiers of support packages, and we can find one that fits your budget.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.